Hello, everyone, and happy Sunday, April 18, 2021. I'm Riley King, and welcome to this Sunday edition of This Week with Riley King. Let's begin right now. First up, we want to make sure that legacy, the sacrifices that were made, were worth it. As President Biden pledges to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th. Martha Raddatz from ABC News hears from some of those impacted by the war. Let's take a listen to that video from ABC News.
For women, we're fighting terrorists. After nearly 20 years and 4 administrations, President Joe Biden announced this week U.S. military presence in Afghanistan will end by September 11th. Some 800,000 U.S. service members have served at least one tour in Afghanistan, more than 2,300 of those men and women killed. Thousands more wounded, along with an estimated 43,000 Afghan civilians. I'll ask U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken about the remaining security concerns, but first, the view from some who have spent months and years in the forever war.
It's time for American troops to come home.
A flood of complex and conflicted emotions. That's what Marine Corps veteran Ashley Burns felt watching President Biden's announcement on ending American involvement in the war in Afghanistan.
We all have this emotional tie to it, and we want to make sure that that legacy, that the sacrifices that were made were worth it.
Burns deployed to Afghanistan in 2009. Did you look around and you thought, we're doing good for women, we're fighting terrorists? What was your purpose?
It's hard not to feel like you have the ability to make a difference. When you go and you see a school being built, when you see infrastructure being stood up, when you see wells going in the ground where people didn't have access to water, it feels good to be able to do those things.
Over the past 2 decades, I've spent countless weeks in Afghanistan seeing the progress and the tragic loss. Many of those days were spent with General John Campbell during the height of the war. But after all those years, the general wants to be clear about one comparison.
This is not Vietnam. Our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, the great civilians we had there did some great things in Afghanistan. We've got to make sure they understand that and the American people understand that.
But Campbell worries what will happen without the U.S. presence.
We have probably 5,000 to 7,000 Taliban prisoners still in prison. I think they'll all be let go. I think the Afghan people are concerned about what happens then.
How do you balance what America needs for what is going to make Afghanistan a place that has stability and security and prosperity for more people?
For years, author Gail Zamak Laman has been writing about Afghan women and girls and their fight for equality. Gail, it's 20 years that the U.S. has been there. It can't go on forever, so why not now?
I think the challenge for women in particular is that they never went from being seen as a pet rock or a pet project to a national security imperative, to people that must be there for the future to look different from the past.
Still, a number of veterans of this war feel a pullout is long overdue, like Kyle Bibby.
I'm proud to have served in the Marine Corps.
9/11 motivated him to serve as a Marine.
The Taliban were definitely responsible for a lot of terrible atrocities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the United States has, a 20-year commitment towards fighting there.
It's a short-sighted decision, but I fully understand that the American people have war fatigue.
Steve Brown has been a lead sponsor of a Rotary Club school in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, a school I visited in 2009. It has since graduated thousands of girls and boys, but Brown says the U.S. withdrawal is putting that in jeopardy.
I am hopeful but not optimistic about the programs going forward.
A concern shared even by those who say they know 20 years of war has been more than long enough.
I don't think that anyone wants the legacy to be sacrifice begets more sacrifice. We can't use the people who have died or been wounded as justification to keep going on forever.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. Dan Abrams tells Martha Raddatz he thinks it is highly unlikely that there will be an acquittal in the Chauvin trial, adding that he thinks the closing arguments are going to be very important. Let's take a listen to this video from ABC News.
It occurred a certain way. In fact, their own expert.
And Dan, what do you expect in these closing arguments? We know the defense is trying to say Chauvin did not cause George Floyd's death. Can they convince a jury of that, given what the prosecutors have laid out? And again, that video we have all seen.
Look, it's not going to be easy, but remember that all the defense has to present is reasonable doubt. They don't have to prove that it occurred a certain way. In fact, their own expert in this case says it's uncertain as to what the cause of death is. So if those jurors are unsure, if they think it's likely it occurred one way, but they can't say it beyond a reasonable doubt, that could be an acquittal. With all that said, I think it is highly unlikely you're going to see an acquittal here. It is possible always you have a hung jury. It is possible that there are disputes or debates about what charge. But I think those of us who've been watching this case closely, who've been watching all the expert testimony, watch the video, watch the opening statements, etc., would be stunned if there was an all-out acquittal where you find 12 jurors who say that he was not guilty. And I think the closing arguments are going to be very important.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. Exclusive. Secretary of State Antonio Blinken defends President Biden's pledge to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. We want to Afghanistan 20 years ago, and we want to because we were attacked on 9/11. We achieved the objectives that we set out to achieve. Let's take a listen to that video from ABC News right now.
And the path ahead.
Mr. Secretary, you've heard the reaction from the generals who commanded troops in Afghanistan, including the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs and David Petraeus, who went on to become CIA director, who say this will leave America more vulnerable to terrorist threats, with Joe Dunford saying it would also have a catastrophic effect in Afghanistan itself. Your reaction?
Look, Martha, I just got back from Kabul. I met with President Ghani, met with other leaders there. That was just after coming from NATO, meeting with all of our allies. And across the board, I heard support for the president's decision and the path ahead. Here's the reality. And by the way, I have great respect for General Petraeus, General Dunford, and others. But we had a very deliberate and fully informed process leading up to the decision by the president. And the fact is this. We went to Afghanistan 20 years ago. And we went because we were attacked on 9/11. And we went to take on those who had attacked us on 9/11 and to make sure that Afghanistan would not again become a haven for terrorism directed at the United States or any of our allies and partners. And we achieved the objectives that we set out to achieve. Al-Qaeda has been significantly degraded. Its capacity to conduct an attack against the United States now from Afghanistan is not there. And of course, Osama bin Laden was brought to justice 10 years ago. So the president felt that as we're looking at the world now, we have to look at it through the prism of 2021, not 2001. The terrorism threat has moved to other places, and we have other very important items on our agenda, including the relationship with China including dealing with everything from climate change to COVID. And that's where we have to focus our energy and resources.
Okay, and there you go on that video. And also, Martha Raddatz presses Secretary of State Antonio Blinken on Biden's administration's refugee cap, 125,000 next year. Is that your goal? The president has been clear about where he wants to go, Blinken says. Let's take a listen to that video as well.
The White House. And I want to move on to refugees. The Biden administration is poised to break a major promise to increase the number of refugee admissions to 62,000, calling it unlikely, instead signing an emergency presidential determination that keeps the cap at 15,000, which was President Trump's historic low number. Refugees International President Eric Schwartz said the president's decision to reaffirm the refugee admissions ceiling of his predecessor is deeply disappointing. Now, I know on Friday, the White House said there was some confusion with that, and we'll talk about it again in May. Can you please clear that up? Is the cap on, and how far could it go?
So, Martha, one of the biggest problems we faced was inheriting a broken system. And the refugee system that we found was not in a place, did not have the resources, the means to effectively process as many people as we hoped. But what we've done now, what the president has done now in signing the initial directive, is to make sure we can start the process of actually bringing people in, and beyond that, lifting restraints that the previous administration had imposed, so that no one, for example, from Africa or the Middle East could come in. That is now
I know what you've done in that, but how many refugees do you think will be let in this year? And if you don't make that 62,000, will there be 125,000 next year? Which was your goal?
I think what the president has and the White House has said today is that, based on what we've now seen from in terms of the inheritance and being able to look at what was in place, what we could put in place, how quickly we could put it in place, it's going to be very hard to meet the 62,000 this fiscal year. But we're going to be revisiting this over the coming weeks. I think there'll be an additional directive coming out in the middle of May. But the good news is we're now starting, and we're able to start to bring people in who've been in the pipeline and who weren't able to come in. That is starting today. And we're going to revisit it in the middle of May.
125,000 next year? Is that your goal?
Look, the president's been clear about where he wants to go, but we have to be, focused on what we're able to do when we're able to do it.
Okay, and there you go on that video and that report. And that does it for this Sunday edition of This Week with Riley King. Thank you for watching. Have a great rest of your Sunday, everyone. See you back here next Sunday for another edition of This Week with Riley King. Goodbye.